Is a multi-generational trip to Disney a dream or a nightmare? In today's video, I'll share my experience with 3 generations on one trip, as well as some considerations for future planning.
Welcome to Always Planning Disney, where planning is half the fun. I'm Melissa.
And I'm Cheryl.
On this channel, we talk through all of the details that go into making our vacations magical. So for a little bit of context, I have only gone on a 3-generation trip when I was of the youngest generation. And we did very chill rides, lots of pool time, lots of wandering, shopping. Expectations were about as low as you could get them. And also it was the 90s and you didn't have to reserve anything ahead of time. Like I have a clear memory of waking up one morning and we were at the Contemporary and our room overlooked Chef Mickey's and we're like, should we go there for breakfast today? We're like, yeah, okay, we'll go. And we just walked right in. So things are very different now. Yeah, that is not how it works now. I'm also more adventurous in the rides that I am willing to go on than I was back then. I'm also now in the middle generation, surrounded by very different preferences on either side. And all the planning ahead, it's completely different. So I am here for some of your experience and expertise.
Yeah, I have never gone to Disney without my parents, which sounds weird to say in my mid-30s, but I haven't. So I obviously went with them growing up, and then I would kind of get invited along on trips in college and grad school. And at that point in time, my husband was along as well. And now that we have a kid of our own, we're continuing to go with them. So multi-generational trips, that's kind of what we do now.
Which the thought of it, my mom has suggested, or maybe I suggested to her, I don't know who's brought it up, but I know we've both mentioned it, that maybe she would tag along with us on one of our trips, even if it was just for a small portion of it. But even just the early planning stages seem difficult because right now, I just pick the date. Too bad everybody goes with me. I'm the mom and I'm paying for it. So I pick the date. But how do you manage things like choosing a date and figuring out what resort is best when you have many more opinions and preferences?
Yeah, I don't know that just tagging along on a trip like this is really possible, because I think that's just setting you up for someone to be disappointed or someone's feelings to be hurt, or just not the best multi-generational trip, right? Yeah. So in our group, everybody gets a say in what the trip looks like. But I would say my mom and I are definitely the ones doing the bulk of the planning and the decision making for the group. So sometimes all of us will talk together, or at least all of the adults will talk together, and my 4-year-old will chime in occasionally about things. But there are also lots of times where my mom and I will get into, we need to figure out this issue. We'll separately go and talk to our husbands about it and then come back together to come to a decision. So we're kind of the family representatives that are deciding all the things. So you have to really determine what are everybody's priorities and what are everybody's schedules when you're doing that early planning of choosing a date and a resort. On our last trip in 2020, we only had really one school schedule that was any sort of concern, and that was my mom's. She was a preschool administrator at the time, so it factored in, but it didn't factor in the same way that it would have if she had been teaching in a classroom. So the rest of us could take off whenever, so we were able to just go for a time that was supposed to have projected lower crowds that did not turn out to be the case. That was a lie, but we tried. So for our next trip, I think we have some more talking to do in our group regarding timing and length of stay. We haven't hashed all of that out yet, even though we've been talking about it for at least a year now. Mm-hmm. And the school schedule is going to have more of an impact for us because our son will be in kindergarten. So that's a factor. It's not like the factor, but it's a factor. And we've also all kind of agreed our top priority on this trip is we want to have a longer trip over, more expensive or something like that. Like our priority is really staying as long as we can and having lower crowds as possible, even though we know that could be a lie again. So we've kind of already agreed on those nebulous parts of it, right? Those ideas about it. And then those will kind of influence our other decisions when we get into something more specific. And then last trip, our resort kind of just fell into our laps. So there wasn't a whole lot of conversation about the resort. It was our first time that we were renting with DVC points from our family member, not from one of the big sites. And she has 2 home resorts, and one of them is Animal Kingdom Lodge, which that was my husband's dream bucket resort. Never thought he'd be able to stay there. So between him and then we had the advantage of my family member's 11-month booking window since it was her home resort, and then having a toddler who loved animals, it was really easy for us all to agree, like, let's just go ahead and do Animal Kingdom Lodge. We just decided between Kidani and Jumbo, and that wasn't a big conversation. And we're lucky that next trip, all of us kind of independently of one another decided that we really want to stay in the Epcot area. So that's just kind of been a consensus for us. And it's worked out really nicely because we actually all feel very strongly that we want to stay Epcot area. So it's nice. We know that that's the location we want to shoot for. We're probably going to go for a boardwalk, but we'll hash out the details as we go along.
And I know you've been looking at 2 possible like rough dates. Is everybody in your party also considering those 2? Does anybody have a strong preference one way or the other?
No, and that's kind of the problem. And that's what I think we need to get into in another video is, so we're kind of deciding between, do we want to be there in like early December for Festival of the Holidays and all of the holiday decorations and everything that has to offer? Or do we want to go more like late January, early February for Festival of the Arts, when we wouldn't have the holiday decor, but we would have probably better festival food booths for a lot of our party. And we would also, I mean, we just have another couple months to save up money. That's always a good thing because we do want it to be kind of a splurgy trip. So the problem there is that everybody's kind of okay with either way, and we need to have strong opinions soon so we can make up our minds. So I think we'll have to get into that in another video.
Yeah. So once you pick that date and you know the resort you want, does one person book everything and then you have all the others pay back their share? Do you book separately? How do you manage booking once you've made the big decision?
For us, we found it easiest to just have a single booking for our flights and for our room. So for those items, one of us paid and the other reimbursed. And that wasn't a big deal. We just split it down the middle. Well, for the room. For the flights, we had 3 and they had 2. Since we weren't booking a package altogether, we were buying things a la carte. There wasn't any reason that we would purchase park tickets together. That wouldn't make any sense. So we did each buy our own there around the same time so that we were ready for a fast pass window. I guess a consideration for this is that we were taking the same flight and we were staying together in a 2-bedroom villa. So I think in other circumstances, if we were like coming from different places or just taking flights at different times, if we had 2 completely separate rooms, maybe not at the same resort, in those cases, I think it would have probably been easier to book and pay separately. But since we had so much of it that was intertwined, it made more sense for us to just book at the same time.
Now that you've made it to Disney, you have survived the booking, you've survived the flight. How do you manage everybody's preferences and expectations? I know it's hard with just 2 generations. What happens once you toss some parents in there?
Yeah, this was something that was just constantly shifting over the course of the entire trip. And this is something that I didn't necessarily anticipate being an issue for us because we have a lot of the same preferences and expectations, actually. We've traveled to Disney together quite a bit. A lot of us really like the same things at Disney. So like similar things are priorities. So that does make things a little bit smoother for our group, even though we have so many people. So on our next trip, we all want to have a slower and a more relaxing trip. So because we all have that same priority, we can kind of work together and make that happen, decide together, okay, if we want it to be a slower trip, then that means that we need to cut some things from it. And I think we'll be able to do that better because we all have that same like larger goal for the trip. But really, communication is so key for making all of this work. And I've realized as sort of like the central person who is obsessed with all of this planning, I've realized that I really need to keep pressing and keep asking more questions and keep asking for more details about the answers to those questions. Because just saying like, what do you want on the trip? Or like, what are important things to you? That doesn't always get you the information that you need to plan a good trip for everyone that's going along on the trip. And I think that's where the whole tagging along concept, like that's where that worries me, is if like one grandparent is just tagging along and is like, oh, don't worry about me, I'm gonna have fun no matter what, I'm just there to be with the grandkids. I kind of don't believe that, you know? So I would push back on that and ask like, okay, when you went to Disney World before, what did you really love there? Or what do you really like to do on vacation? And just like make sure that that stuff can get built in so that they don't wind up feeling at the end of it like, yeah, I got time with my grandkids, but it would have been nice to do some other things that I liked as well. So one differing preference that we have for our next trip is actually the dining plan. So my husband and I, we feel like we get our money's worth. We like the inclusive feeling of the dining plan. So we would really like to get to the table service dining plan next time. And my folks, they don't eat as much as we do. They don't drink very much in terms of alcoholic beverages. So they just aren't using the credits like we would. So that might impact things for us, where like we might wind up doing 2 separate rooms next time instead of a 2-bedroom villa. Or we might, you know, if we do the 2 separate rooms and one of us has the dining plan, then we might end up splitting off for meals more than we did last trip, because we'll have some table service reservations that they aren't joining us for. So that sort of stuff is going to be a factor for us. And we'll also have to decide, you know, if they really don't want the dining plan, do we want it so much that we would prefer to have separate rooms, or would we rather pay out of pocket for our dining and then be able to do a 2-bedroom villa and have that extra living space? So it's going to be a big sort of negotiation process. But in that case, it's less, I don't know, it's less a communication thing between branches and more about my husband and I deciding what's most important to us. So it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah. And do you guys sit down and do all of that math and like present it to your parents?
I don't think it'll get that far. I think it'll be, yeah, probably just a conversation between us as to like, how badly do we want the dining plan? Mm-hmm. And then if we're sort of on the fence about it, I could also see conversations coming up with my folks about, do we want to do a villa next time, or do we want to do 2 studios? Because that's something we're already talking about, because it would cost less to do 2 studios, but then we could be across the resort from each other, which is much less convenient. So I don't know, that'll be a whole conversation I guess, and figure out what's important.
So like you mentioned, hotel, dining, and then when you're in the park, the rides. How do you choose when you're splitting up as opposed to when you're going to stay together as one big multi-generational group?
Yeah. Well, so in terms of planning ahead, the hotel is really the most important thing to think about in advance. I mean, obviously because you have to book it, but just because I think that's probably the most likely to have the biggest impact on your trip. So we had lived with my parents before, and we knew we can share a 2-bedroom villa with them and we're not going to be up in each other's business or something. It's going to be fine. And we also knew that it would make it easier if, you know, our son is taking a nap and one of us, you know, maybe both of us want to go and get something to eat at the food court. And we can do that because my parents are taking a nap right next door. So there's going to be someone in the room with them. So that element of it would work really well for us. The shared living space was really nice for us. We were able to have more space than we would have, which was great. So we had the studio side of the 2-bedroom villa, which is just like a normal hotel room. And then in between there was a living space with a living room and a nice sized kitchen. And then they had sort of their suite on the other side of it. So we did have some space between us, but it was all one room and open, and we weren't locking doors or anything between us. So that worked out really well for us and was the best choice for our party. But I think for a lot of people, it would be a terrible choice and everyone would have a miserable time. So I think you need to consider how close you want to be to the rest of your family, whether that's in the same room, if you're able to get a room that will fit your entire party. Maybe you have adjoining rooms. That's not always a guarantee with Disney, but oftentimes you can request adjoining rooms and that'll be fulfilled. Maybe you want to be at the same resort, but you're not worried about having adjoining rooms, so you might be across the resort. Maybe you want to be across property from your family. Maybe that's the best fit for everyone, especially if you're wanting to have very different trips where, you know, maybe one family needs a really kid-friendly hotel with a kid-friendly pool, and one of them needs to have a more adult vibe going on, more relaxing and nicer restaurants or something. So in that case, it might be best to just split off, have completely different resorts for your stay.
So my mom goes to bed way earlier than we do. So we would definitely need separate rooms, or at least we're going to need separate rooms. Not even having a door to like close her in her own bedroom would probably work, because as I've mentioned before, we will stay up late any day as opposed to waking up early. So that part didn't occur to me, that bedtime might be a factor.
Is definitely a factor. And it was a factor for us too, because we knew that our son would be hopefully taking naps. He did not take many, but also going to bed earlier. And so it was really nice that we could shut the door most of the way on our side of the room. And then we had a whole living room we could hang out in. I would take showers in their larger bathroom because they were in the one bedroom side. So I would grab a shower at night and we weren't disturbing our son and trying to like tiptoe around or like hang out in the bathroom. I don't know. What do people do when they're like in a room with their small children and it's a hotel room? Like, what do? You don't want to go to bed that early, but I don't know. So it made it a lot easier for us with his sleep schedule for sure.
What about when you're in the parks?
Yeah, when we're in the parks, we have a lot of the same preferences, like I mentioned. And for this particular trip, everyone wanted to spend a lot of time with our son because it was his first trip. We were seeing everything through his eyes. We were seeing what he liked, what he did not like. So I think everyone just really wanted to be around him as much as they could be this trip. So we planned this trip with the idea that mostly we would be all together. And that didn't keep anyone from running off on their own, but just in terms of our central plans for each day, mostly we were planning to be together. If anybody wanted to split off, then they would just split off. We had cell phones. Everybody had a copy of all of our reservation schedules. So we were able to just be like, okay, I'll meet you, for lunch. I'll meet you for our next fast pass, whatever. So it was really easy to just split off for a little bit here and there. And that was especially relevant for like my parents. If we were going back to the hotel for nap, some days they would come back and have a lie down at the same time. And sometimes, I know on our first park day, my dad was like, well, I don't want to go back yet. So he went and rode Tower of Terror all by himself. And I said, well, make sure you get a picture for me from it. So we just kind of played it by ear for a lot of it, really. But I think one thing that we planned in to be a part was my husband and I had a date night and my folks took our son. And that's actually when we met up with you. So that was super fun. So we had spent the afternoon in Hollywood Studios, and then we sent our son back to the resort with my folks, and they were going to hang out with him and then give him a bath and get him to bed. Well, we went to Fantasmic with you guys, and then tried to get into Trader Sam's and unfortunately failed to do so. So that actually wound up being the favorite night of the trip. I don't want to speak for them, but I'm pretty sure it was my parents' favorite night of the trip and probably our son's as well. So they went back to the resort pretty early, I think earlier than they expected to. And we were staying at Animal Kingdom Lodge, and one of the things that they have to do at Animal Kingdom Lodge is s'mores around the fire. And so they took him down to do s'mores at the campfire, and he still talks about having s'mores at Animal Kingdom. And I think they went and looked at some of the animals and just had like a nice evening with just the three of them. And they all loved it. It was really special for all of them. And it wasn't that like, it wasn't what you think of with a Disney vacation, but it was like really special family time. So I think next trip, I'll have to talk to them, but I think we may try to build in more of that sort of grandparent grandson time alone, where like they can have some special time with their grandson. My husband and I can run off and do some rides that we want to do. And I think it could be really fun.
So you mentioned both fast passes and dining reservations and splitting up and getting back together. Logistically, how does that work when you're reserving things linked to your magic bands, or of course our slow descent into having to use a phone for everything? But aside from that, do you group everybody together or not for these things, and how? It's always all four of us. We just do what we do. I haven't ever had to consider throwing other people into it.
Yeah, so for this trip, we were all like grouped together as a party for the trip. So like all 5 of our My Disney Experience accounts were grouped together as being associated with one another, able to make reservations for one another, all of that. I think all of us adults had the power to do that. So most of the time we were just booking for everybody. There were a few reservations where not everyone was included. Like I think there were some meals that I had booked that my parents didn't want to come along. So I just booked it for our family, and that's no problem either. So like when you're making a dining reservation, you can say, I only want these people included in the reservation, and it'll just book it for them. And I even had, so I think a week before we left, maybe even less than that, a breakfast be our guest reservation popped up as like a before park open one. And I was really hoping to get a reservation before park open so we could get empty park pictures, because of course. So I saw it popped up. I had just been happening to look, and I snagged it for all of us. And I just texted them and said, I made this reservation for everyone. If you don't want to come, I will take your names off of it. But I just like snagged it for all of us, and they wound up coming along, and it was nice. So yeah, it's no big deal. You can just select the people who want to go. Same thing with Fast Pass. And I imagine with Lightning Lane, Genie Plus stuff, it'll be the same. So we had a time where my husband and I were trying to get on Slinky Dog. It was just going to be us in Hollywood Studios, and he just grabbed a fast pass for only the 2 of us and not the entire party. So no big deal.
Oh, that's nice and easy. And, we've split fast passes before when we want to like break off into, brave rides versus Jack and I doing something much calmer. But for dining, we've always done it together. And I guess it never occurred to me, you don't have to select everybody's name when you make that reservation. But
no, you just do need to make sure that anyone who is potentially going to be there, even if they're not eating, they do need to be on the reservation. Otherwise, you'll get in trouble at the restaurant, because they're basing the number of seats at your table on how many people are there, not how many people are eating, if that makes sense. So like we needed to include our son on our reservation, even though he was not old enough that we had to be paying for his meals. He still needed a seat at the table. So it's like a fire code thing.
Correct. I have memories of having to call Disney to clarify this when Jack was 6 months when we went, because he's not eating anything, but does he count at the table? I don't even think he was like high chair sitting, like he was on a lap baby carrier, but we included him because if they wanted to bring that extra high chair seat to the table, you would need a 4-top. But by the time you have 3 people, I don't know if there's a 3-person size table anywhere in Disney, but yes, I had to even include my non-eating baby in our head count.
Yeah, it's important. It's something people forget to do, because of course your baby isn't going to be ordering off the menu, but yeah, they still need a space to be.
Yeah. So you put a lot of thought and planning into getting all 3 generations down to Disney, but what were some of the unexpected pain points of traveling with 3 generations now that you can comfortably look back at your last trip?
Yeah, now with some distance since the last trip. So I think communicating priorities, I've kind of been circling around this one throughout, but they may not say that they care, but they probably do care. I think very few people have absolutely no preference and are just going to come along for the ride. So I was surprised that I wasn't, I guess, hearing more from them about what they wanted. And I feel like next time I'm really going to have to keep asking until I get some answers out of them. So that's going to be something to work on next time. In terms of actually being in the parks, I think our biggest pain point was dining, and that wound up being much trickier than I anticipated. So we had a young child. He was on a pretty strict-ish schedule at home. Like, he was always eating at the same time, sleeping at the same times. He was on a schedule. And so we were planning to just keep him on that same schedule at Disney and not worry about the time change. And it was all going to work out to our advantage. And we had let my folks know about this in advance. But what we found was, so we were mostly eating quick service meals last time. We didn't have a ton of reservations that we were working around. And so we would say, okay, well, it's time for our son to eat. Like, we're going to go and have lunch at this place. And we would find that they weren't hungry yet because it was earlier than they normally eat. And so they'd say, oh, well, we're just going to go wander off and do whatever. And so then we'd say, okay, we're going to go eat, and then we'll catch back up with you. And then we catch back up with them. And by the time we have ordered and sat down and eaten our meal, now they're hungry. And now we need to wait for them to eat their meal. And so it felt like we were spending so much time on just trying to get everybody fed. And it was like that throughout the entire trip. So next trip, I think we're going to have to just figure out a dining schedule. And that's just how it's going to have to be, because I can't do it. I can't do it again. It was so much waiting around for people to eat and them waiting for us to eat. And like, we don't need that. So we need everybody to eat at the same time. This is when we were having a meal. If you may be hungry in the next few hours, come and eat this meal.
I feel like we have to do that even with a family of 4, because somebody will want to eat and maybe we'll pull off to the side, get a snack, eat it real quick. Perhaps not everybody eats the snack, and then everybody's schedule is out of sync for the rest of the day. So I think even with my tiny party of 4, having an eating schedule is very important.
I think I'm going to think about it like some people think about bathrooms, right? So like, one person has to go to the bathroom, everybody goes to the bathroom now, because we don't want to be back in line at the bathroom in half an hour. And so I think that's how I'm going to approach dining next time. Like, okay, it's time for a meal. Everybody's going to eat. Otherwise, you're going to eat a granola bar from your bag or something, because we're not going to stop every hour for somebody to eat a meal.
So, unexpected pain points aside, what makes a 3-generation trip worth it?
Well, I have to say, having help with kids, even though I only have one kid, that's a big deal. That's great. It was nice that we had extra support on our first flight with our kid if we had needed. Turned out we didn't need it. So it wasn't anything to worry about. But it's just nice to have another set of hands when you might need it. It's nice to have other people to distract your kid, to entertain your kid, all of that stuff. So that's really nice. And just the fact that we were able to have a date night, because we're not people who are likely to be comfortable getting a babysitter we haven't met before. I know that there are services available for that, but I don't think I'd be okay with that. So being able to have a date night and know that our son is with his grandparents, who he knows very, very well, that's really wonderful. So yeah, that alone is a big benefit of a multi-generational trip, is just having some extra help with the kids. I'll also say Disney is obviously my happy place, but it's not just my happy place. It's also my mom's happy place for sure. So she's always gone there just as much for her as for taking us kids when we were younger. So sharing that with her is a lot of fun. It's really fun to plan these trips with her. We talk about it pretty much every time we talk. Disney comes up in some capacity. We were just talking about Disney again this morning. So just having that opportunity to share with my mom is really fun. And then, I mean, we know that my parents won't always be able to go to Disney with us. So we just really want to share these memories with them while we can. And that's really special.
Oh, that's so nice. My mom is not a big Disney fan by any means. So she's always wanted to go with us just to enjoy it, with us and through our eyes. And I think once she gets there again, something will click and she will become a major Disney person. It's just a feeling I have.
Well, you'll have to report back. I'm curious to hear.
Yeah. I think she'd get a lot of the magic of it now, and I think she'd also really enjoy staying on Disney property because it is so nice and she likes higher end vacation experiences. And so I think coming back again, especially after all this time, would really sort of spark that magic for her. And then maybe she'll never leave us when we go to Disney. Who knows?
Well, I hope it works out for you. I hope you're able to bring her along on one of these trips. And I hope it's a very magical trip for everybody involved.
Yes.
All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let us know in the comments whether you've taken a multi-generational trip to Disney and how it went. And remember to like and subscribe to plan along with us.